Imagine someone telling you that the wine you're holding might just resemble a cup straight from heaven, and suddenly the entire sermon erupts into a firestorm. That's exactly the chaos that unfolded when Bishop Hogan made his heaven and wine remark, triggering an immediate, explosive, and deeply revealing reaction. Tonight, you're about to witness what no one saw coming. The hidden pressure sitting behind the pulpit and why this single phrase set off a controversy far bigger than a drink is what we're diving into. Stay with me. You won't believe the turns this moment takes. What began as an ordinary sermon quickly spiraled into one of the most discussed events in recent church circles. Bishop Hogan, widely recognized for his fiery preaching and fearless approach to modern faith, suddenly found himself at the center of a fierce debate after dropping a statement nobody anticipated. In a recent service, he mentioned wine in a way that compared it to a taste of heaven, sparking confusion, curiosity, and outrage all at the very same time. Clips from the moment spread online in just hours. Some labeled it blasphemy, others insisted people misinterpreted a piece of symbolism, and a few argued it exposed something much deeper about how the church is evolving in today's world. But what exactly was Bishop Hogan trying to say? Was it just a metaphor that landed wrong, or did it offer a glimpse into his actual beliefs about what heaven truly represents? And maybe most importantly, why did pastors and believers react with such intensity? In this video, we're breaking everything down. What Bishop Hogan said, how the backlash started, what his supporters and critics are claiming now, and what this entire uproar suggests about the direction of modern ministry.
You'll see the hidden context, the emotional fallout, and the behind-the-scenes tension most media outlets haven't even touched. Because this isn't simply about wine, it's about the razor-thin line between faith and freedom, metaphor and disrespect, and how a single comment can rattle an entire congregation. It was an ordinary Sunday morning at New Life Cathedral. The choir had just wrapped up their final song. The congregation was standing, and Bishop Hogan stepped up to the pulpit with that unmistakable confidence that always seemed to command the room. Cameras were rolling, as usual, for the thousands who watch his live streams. Midway through the sermon, right in the middle of a passionate point about joy, heaven, and divine fulfillment, Bishop Hogan leaned in and said something nobody saw coming. If you've ever tasted a good wine and felt a moment of peace, imagine heaven being like that, but everlasting. The room froze for a beat. A few people chuckled softly, assuming he was speaking symbolically. Others looked around, confused. And then a single clip, just that one sentence, was cut, shared, and posted on social media. Within hours, the internet blew up. The video was titled, "Bishop Hogan Says Heaven Feels Like Drinking Wine," and outrage ignited instantly. Some accused him of disrespecting holiness, while others claimed he was glorifying sin. Memes popped up, reaction videos followed, and the story took on a momentum of its own. For those familiar with Bishop Hogan's preaching, the comment aligned with his long history of using bold metaphors to provoke thought. He frequently described divine joy through earthly experiences, food, music, laughter, believing heaven wasn't some far-off abstraction, but a reflection of the way love and joy are felt in the present moment. Still, this particular statement crossed a line for many because, in the eyes of conservative believers, wine represents temptation, sin, and a loss of control, everything opposite of holiness. To them, hearing a bishop compare heaven to wine wasn't poetic at all. It was scandalous. And that's the moment the debate shifted from simply being about words to becoming a battle over what modern faith is supposed to sound like. But the controversy didn't stop there. Just when the internet assumed the outrage would fade away, Bishop Hogan chose to respond live, direct, and completely unfiltered. When the backlash first blew up, Bishop Hogan stayed quiet for a few days. And that silence only intensified the drama. News pages started publishing headlines like "Bishop Under Fire for Comparing Heaven to Alcohol," and "Church Leaders Warn of Dangerous Preaching." Some believed Hogan was intentionally ignoring the uproar, while others thought he was taking time to craft his reply. When Sunday rolled around again, he stepped before his congregation, looked straight into the camera, and confronted it head-on. They took it out of context. He said with firmness, his tone calm but full of conviction, "I wasn't glorifying alcohol. I was glorifying peace. The same way people chase comfort in temporary things, I was showing that heaven is the eternal version of that joy. I mentioned wine because that's something people understand, but they missed the message. The congregation clapped. Some shouted amen, others simply nodded, relieved to finally hear his side. But outside those church walls, the reactions split sharply. Critics weren't buying it. A few major gospel bloggers reposted the clip again, insisting Hogan was trying to backpedal after realizing he crossed a line. One well-known pastor even went live and said, "We have to stop comparing the holy to the worldly. Heaven isn't a sip of wine, it's sacred." That comment reignited the entire argument. Was Hogan genuinely modernizing the language of faith, or was he watering it down just to keep audiences entertained? Bishop Hogan, however, doubled down. In a follow-up video on his official page, he expanded on his thoughts, saying, "For too long, religion has made joy feel sinful. I believe heaven is the purest expression of joy. Whatever peace you've ever felt in life, multiply that by infinity." That's what I meant. His loyal supporters praised him for standing firm, calling his explanation refreshing and even brave. They felt he was one of the few pastors bold enough to bridge ancient scripture with modern understanding. Others argued that his reasoning sounded too convenient. They pointed out that Hogan had been stirring controversy long before this. Known for sermon titles like "Jesus Had a Sense of Humor" and "Heaven Ain't Boring." To those critics, this was just another attention-grabbing move. The division spread quickly. Churches began debating the meaning of joy, wine, and holiness in Bible studies. TikTok creators stitched the clip with their commentary, some calling it a wake-up call for the church to stop taking itself so seriously, while others warned it showed spiritual decline. Even mainstream outlets started picking up the story, framing Hogan as the latest example of how the internet is reshaping religious conversation. But this is where things became even more personal. Because as the criticism grew louder, people began digging through Hogan's past, his teachings, his history, even pieces of his private life, looking for any hint of hypocrisy. And what they uncovered next only intensified the entire controversy. Once the Heaven and Wine clip went viral, social media did what it always does. It started digging. Old clips from Bishop Hogan's previous sermons, some nearly a decade old, began resurfacing everywhere. People were hunting for patterns, trying to determine whether this wine comment was an isolated slip or a glimpse of a deeper, long-standing theology Hogan had been hinting at for years. It didn't take long before critics found exactly what they wanted. In one older sermon titled "The Taste of Glory," Bishop Hogan had once said that heaven isn't some boring cloud-filled place where people just sing endlessly. Instead, he preached that heaven is the fullness of every good thing you've ever felt on earth, without the pain that usually follows afterward. Back then, hardly anyone paid attention, but now with the wine controversy at its peak, that message was suddenly being reinterpreted. People began quoting old clips out of context, some heavily edited to sound more provocative than they originally were. One video with over 1 million views was captioned, "He's been comparing heaven to earthly pleasure for years." That clip sparked an entirely new wave of criticism. Pastors and theologians began weighing in, debating on podcasts, panels, and live streams. One church scholar from Atlanta commented, "Bishop Hogan's ideas about heaven may not be heresy, but they're dangerous. The church is built on reverence. If every spiritual symbol becomes something sensual, you risk stumbling into blurred sacred boundaries." Yet his supporters refused to back down. They argued Bishop Hogan was simply speaking in the language modern believers understand, people who experience spirituality through real, relatable emotions. They even pointed out that Jesus used wine imagery during the Last Supper, saying, "This is my blood," to them. Hogan wasn't doing anything except translating ancient symbolism into a modern perspective. The divide grew wider with each passing day. As one gospel influencer put it, this isn't about a preacher and a wine comment. This is about the entire future of preaching. Meanwhile, Bishop Hogan remained composed. He didn't delete any posts, didn't issue an apology, and didn't appear rattled by the backlash at all. In fact, he reposted an old sermon clip with a caption reading, "The truth offends before it transforms." That single line sent social media into yet another frenzy. Some called it arrogance. Others said it was bold. Either way, Bishop Hogan was no longer just a preacher caught in controversy. He had become a symbol in a much larger debate about what the modern church should sound like. And then, just as the dust began to settle, a major twist hit the story. A leaked video emerged from a private minister's retreat showing Bishop Hogan talking about joy, heaven, and freedom in a way that reignited everything all over again, not just him. Sitting alone in his study, speaking softly like a man who had finally reached his breaking point. "I never meant to make heaven sound casual," he began, his eyes tired but steady. "I was trying to make it sound real. When I said that line about wine, I wasn't thinking about the bottle, I was thinking about my father." He paused for a long moment before going on. "My father used to drink after a long week. Not to escape, but to breathe. One day he told me, 'Son, this little sip doesn't bring me joy, it reminds me that I still need it.' When I became a pastor, I realized that's how many people live. They're thirsty for something that lasts. That's what I meant about heaven. It's peace that doesn't disappear when the glass is empty." The chat immediately filled with hearts and amen comments. Some viewers were crying. Others wrote that they finally understood what he'd been trying to express from the beginning. But Bishop Hogan didn't stop there. He went further, opening up about how ministry had changed him, how fame and criticism can twist even the most sincere pastor into a public target. You start preaching for approval instead of truth. You start focusing more on trends than transformation. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that the message of heaven was meant to bring freedom, not fear. Then he said something that completely silenced everyone watching. "Maybe God allowed this controversy to humble me, because I got too comfortable preaching hope without living it." It wasn't a confession of guilt, it was a confession of awakening. He spoke about the emotional exhaustion of leading a modern congregation, the loneliness that comes with being scrutinized online, and the realization that sometimes the loudest critics are quietly battling the very same doubts and temptations. "I know people are laughing, making memes, calling me names, but I've made peace with that. If even one person watching remembers that heaven is joy, not judgment, then it was worth it." For the first time since the controversy started, his words felt far less like a defense and far more like healing. Even some of his harshest critics admitted they felt something shift after that video. A few pastors who had distanced themselves reached out privately, saying they finally understood the heart behind his metaphor. Social media gradually moved on to its next trending drama. But the echo of Bishop Hogan's message remained. People were still debating theology. Yes, but they were also talking about grace, empathy, and what it really means to communicate faith in a world that records every misstep. In the end, the heaven and wine controversy turned into something bigger than a viral clip. It became a mirror reflecting how faith is interpreted, misunderstood, and defended in an era where everyone has a platform. And for Bishop Hogan, it marked a turning point. His next sermon wasn't loud or defensive. It was humble, stripped down, almost vulnerable. He titled it "Joy Without a Cup." In it, he said, "Heaven isn't about wine, it's about wholeness." But maybe God used that moment to remind me and all of us that joy is still holy. As he closed that sermon, the congregation rose to its feet, not out of curiosity, not because of controversy, but out of understanding. And whether people agreed or disagreed with his theology, one truth was undeniable. Bishop Hogan had reminded the world that behind every preacher, there is still a person learning grace, one mistake at a time.